the worst thing that I personally feel, which is most regressive, and as much as everything is probably as important as the other, but there is this umbrella understanding which bewilders me the most, and that is so many years, so many revolutions, and so much movement, and so much activism, and so many centuries and millennia of oppression, and yet as a society we refuse to accept that women are, disadvantaged. They are a disadvantaged section in societies, and in most societies. I can also take the step of saying in almost every society in different way. Maybe the disadvantage that I have in India might be different from the one I might have in China, but doesn't change the fact that we are equally disadvantaged. And the fact that when you meet very educated people, very out there people, and they refuse to say that, they refuse to accept that women are still disadvantaged and need, they need special legislative, societal, economic efforts in the direction that can change this. They don't agree with it. They feel like the whole idea that women are disadvantaged is some sham, or it is some sort of made up thing. It's a propaganda, and feminism is unnecessary. And this is again not someone who's not literate or someone who did not have exposure. These are people who I've even known people who are like very high positions, government positions, and in so many positions, and they just refuse to accept that yes, misogyny exists. Patriarchy is the dominant way of family structures and political structures, and they simply just straight up refuse it. They just simply deny it, and I feel that is the most regressive pattern that I've seen. And I feel all the other patterns that I know fall under this. Because once you start denying that there's misogyny and patriarchy, and that is the main norm that is prevalent, and that needs to be changed, you're basically denying almost everything that happens under it. So I feel that's like the umbrella issue that I feel exists. I feel as someone who has younger siblings, and as someone who's been like this elder daughter, I feel, and in most conversations that I've had with people, the biggest role models for the children will always be the mother and the father, which means like the immediate, like the first family. Of course, you might be living in a joint family where you might have uncles and aunts and everything, but your first example of love or equality or whatever begins there. Because everything that you learn outside is through your education is going to be like secondary. It's going to come post that. Once you start going to school, you go to parties, you go to college, you go XYZ places. The first building block begins when you see your parents, when you see that your father comes home, and the way he supports your mother, or the way what's the dynamic between your parents, and how their love entails equality, and it's like an equal relationship, and it's a relationship of support. That really defines how the child looks at love, how the child looks at respect, and how the child realizes that these two things really go hand in hand. I feel like in families, in dysfunctional places where the child sees that the father is abusive, or the mother is not present, or whatever the unhealthy dynamics that exist in the family, or the father does not support them, or the father is entitled, or someone is entitled and the other person is just bearing on the brunt and the labor, then they start feeling like this is normal. And then it becomes extremely tough to get them out of this idea when they grow up, because then this is going to just keep continuing through the generations. And that's also going to cause very much a problem when that child gets in relationships, gets in friendships, and sees women and sees men, and then he just basically feels like this is the core idea of how it's supposed to be. So I feel like the biggest example of almost everything that they know starts not just at their home, but with their parents, with their families, how they love each other, but more than that, they also respect each other. My biggest, I think the biggest message that took me a lot of time to accept, which means that definitely is not an easy one to take, is accept that abuse is happening to you. Do not deny it. The most common thing that I see is any sort of harassment, any sort of absurdity that women face around me, young, old, women of all ages, honestly, women of all social stratas, women of all economic backgrounds, like rich, disadvantaged, all type of women I see very commonly is, अगर उनके साथ कुछ हो रहा है, they're like maybe going through some online abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse, or their partner is like emotionally abusive, they protect the partner, they protect the criminal, they protect the person who's supposed to be who's supposed to be guilty of doing all this. So I think one thing that I would always tell a woman is, do not do the mental labor of protecting people are actively working towards harassing you or being an agent of misogyny in your life. I know that's easier said than done, and this is a lesson that I believe all women know, probably. And it's more about how you act on it. And even me myself, I don't think I can practice this, and it's almost natural to say that, oh no, he loves me, that's why he doing it, or maybe he does not mean this, he means that. I would say do not do the mental labor, okay? If an adult is saying things and doing things, they are responsible, 100% responsible for it. You do not have anything to do with protecting that. Please protect yourself and dislodge yourself from that situation and act upon it fast. Do not protect someone is not worthy of being protected. If you don't call the misogyny out, nobody's going to call it out for you. You need to take the first step. I think one of my favorite stories is the one where it actually started from. So my grandfather, who is a retired army veteran, and my mother, they were the ones who basically were involved in all sorts of activism back in my hometown when I was extremely young, say like 12, 13, 14 years old. So I used to go around with them and I used to just see the work that they were doing. Now, the place that they were dealing with was this rural tribal space near one of our farmlands in Jabalpur, okay? And this place was actually really popular in that area, for making alcohol in their backyards and all sorts of substances that they used to create. And that was their only economic prospect, कि वो कच्ची दारू जिसे हम कहते हैं हिंदी में, they used to make that, and women actually made that. And what a lot of people were very quick to judge them, कि अरे ये तो इस किस्म के लोग हैं, these are the kind of people that they are. And I think my mother was the first person to have actually shared and talked about this, and she said that women there are just trying to make money, and they're just trying to run their houses, and this might have looked like the best prospect that they might have been able to pull off in the skills that they have. And that is when, with some collaboration, because I was young, I don't really remember the procedure how she did it, she helped them shift, and with other people, of course, with other friends and members of the activism that she used to work with and my nanu used to work with, they basically started with more sustainable businesses. I remember it was like paper mache pens and this and that and a lot of things, and they helped them shift into sustainable economic prospects and businesses that really changed the face of that village. Not only were those women now in safe economic spaces, it also helped them grow beyond the village. It also helped them just in general become more empowered, and it really changed the face of the village as a whole. Just a simple step of the way the economic activity of the women were changed into more sustainable, respectable, organized economic prospects. So this, I think, explains how for the longest time we look at economy and trade and business and enterprise from a male lens, yes, but just a small village and just a very small change of what economic enterprise the women are taking up changed the face of the village. And I even remember while we were doing this, we started working on menstrual hygiene management in the village, and we worked with the local Anganwadi for free pads and everything. And while this was like a whole, like, it needs a lot more detail on how this whole thing happened, I think that village is till date the biggest success story that I've seen, because it just really stays with me. And this is happening while I was growing up. This is happening when I'm like, say, 15 or 16. And this was my biggest motivation. This was my biggest motivation in the sense that things are possible if you take it, if you go out and you try to make it happen. And you really need to change your approach. You need to change your perspective. And that entire village is somewhere that I still look back to when I go back home, and I get so inspired and motivated by those women, their children, and that entire space. I think the biggest issue when at Har Hak, whenever we go to these JJ clusters, and back home also when I used to talk to these women, and I'll just explain it with a little story. I went to this village that I was talking about. There was this pregnant woman, okay, and she was my age. That's what I personally felt. But she claimed that she was 18 or 19, but she honestly felt like she was much younger, and we do not know exactly. But that was my instinct, and I just also knew that no way she's 18 or 19, she's probably younger. And she was pregnant with her second child, okay? And the first child was already a year or two old. And she was extremely malnourished. And so every time I used to go to that village, I used to specifically go and speak to the woman. No activism, just talking, just going to the village and talking to this lady. And I'm talking and I'm just asking her how her health is. And she was struggling with her pregnancy because, of course, she was malnourished. And she just had a child a year ago or two. And she's definitely young. And every time I used to go and speak to this lady, the husband used to loiter around, and he used to give me this side eye or this look of disgust of how I am indoctrinating his wife, how मैं उनको भड़का रही हूँ, या basically how I'm like this city girl and I'm like this bad city girl who's trying to indoctrinate his wife, or who's trying to like मैं उनकी wife को कुछ सिखा पढ़ा रही हूँ and everything, and how I'm basically breaking his house and family. And over time he started also giving me signals and energy, and just with his actions and words, that please do not come to our place. I'm not comfortable with you speaking to my wife. And of course that was extremely clear, because I used to ask her about her struggles. And when you speak about your struggles, you're very obvious that you start realizing them, and you start calling them out, and you kind of start fighting against them, right? When you start speaking about them, when you start sharing them, and more women were getting connected now. And I feel that is the biggest problem. It's an extreme, the family structure I've seen in these, the institution of families and marriages. And of course, when I say this, I don't mean that there are no other economic issues or social issues or caste-based issues or all that. But this is one issue that I've personally seen a lot. Even when we go to like JJ clusters and when we teach the children, they might be, because children are young and they understand fast and they're very, very open and progressive, and बच्चों को समझाना बहुत आसान होता है, and they learn fast. But I feel like when they go back home and they try to share it with the family and the sister and the parents and the mother and the father, they're shushed. In fact, it might also backfire in a way that the parents might feel like, ये क्या हमारे बच्चों को सिखा पढ़ा रहे हैं, right? So they kill it. They kill the idea. They kill any chance or scope of the child growing up into a better adult. And that is one problem that I see most commonly, that it is very tough to try to change the setting. And I understand why it comes from, how it comes from, and but I still feel like that the family as an institution does not let any change happen. And when the family stops it, the change never goes out of the threshold. एक change को threshold से बाहर निकलने के लिए, एक idea को threshold से बाहर निकलने के लिए उसके ऊपर बात होनी ज़रूरी है, families में, घरों में. And the family as a whole needs to accept it, that okay, we need to do this or we won't do this. But अगर मैं एक लड़की को जाके समझाती हूँ कि MHM and this and that, and अगर घर जाके उसके माँ बाप उसको force करते हैं, then honestly, how does she help it? And I understand the agony of young people who can be stuck in such situations. So I realized that this is one of the many problems that I've actively seen and first-handedly seen. I feel like, and I can say this as someone who reads, who studies, and who academically also involved herself in political science and legislation in terms of policy making and this and that, and also some sense of groundwork. I feel like nobody will make a policy for people. No government, and by that I don't mean to point at one government or one institution or judiciary or just the legislation or just the executive. I mean power as a whole. And power as a whole in India, I feel like, would not want to help a sector of society until it does not help them. And that is also something that we were discussing in our class this other day, that the only time that they work towards a certain group is when they feel like they would help them in the election or this or that. They wouldn't want to do anything for you if that does not change the prospect of power that they have in a good way. And for the longest time, I feel like this is the biggest flaw. They do not look at this community in a way that needs actual, bottom-up change. They don't look at it. They would, if you ever talk about poverty or if you ever talk about MHM or anything, mostly the policies I see are like, 1,000 रुपए दे दिए, 500 रुपए दे दिए, and all this yojanas, and just like, because I speak to my house help. And she's like, oh हाँ, तो हमारी इस योजना के उसमें हमें 500 रुपए मिल गए, हमें 1,000 रुपए मिल गए, which is good, which is fine for short-term purposes, because you want to win elections and you just want to stay in power. So it's just easy to just slide in some money in the pockets of the marginalized people, and they'll be convinced that they have to vote for you. But I feel like in the longer run, I don't see enough policies that nobody's trying to change the conditions of marginalized groups. Nobody's trying to change the conditions of women in these marginalized spaces. I just feel like, so I just have these questions like, how does this 500 rupees a month change the fact that they're being abused? Ghar pe. How does the fact that you're giving them, say, 800 rupees ka bhatta or anything change the fact that they're not allowed to go out of the home, or they're being abused, and XYZ things? So I feel like the policies that I notice, that I see women receive, and sometimes don't even receive, most of these policies that I ask, women, I'm like, aapko ye milta hai, aapko wo milta hai? They're like, no, we've never received anything of this sort. And even if we do, our husbands usually take it away. So I feel like there's firstly huge gap between what is claimed and what is implemented. And this has come from the negligence of all power institutions and, of course, society as well. I feel like the society is also not really ready to accept changes. And yeah, that I feel like is one of the biggest problems. There's nobody has a vision, and nobody's interested in a vision. Everybody just wants to stay in power for the next 5 years and then the 5 years after that, and they just want to get through with it without any thought of कि 5 साल में हम सच में किसी की लाइफ चेंज करना चाहते हैं. We actually want to lift people out of that marginalized space. I also personally feel like if people stay in marginalized spaces, it's better for the political parties, because the more marginalized people you have, the bigger your population is of vulnerable people who you can just manipulate and give money and just win over and everything. It's just easier to win over marginalized people. And I feel like no government over the long course of time, no power institution is interested in actually lifting them out of the marginalized spaces. They just want like very short term legislation or policy. And that's what happened even when rape cases happen. I don't know if you notice, but there's never like a long term, how do we fix this problem? And it's usually just like, let's just get through this one case. Extremely problematic, if you ask me. I'll be very honest. I've faced a lot of abuse in my life of different sorts. Maybe different from the abuse a woman my age in a JJ cluster might have faced. Of course, my abuse might be different. My abuse, I might be facing more cyber abuse. She might be facing more physical abuse back home, etc. But one common thing in all of this is neither of us talks about it. And I come from a fairly economically fine background. I recognize my privilege, and most of my friends are as economically privileged as I am. But one thing common between many economically privileged people and marginalized people in terms of like women, marginalized women and economically fine women, it could be the CEO of a company and it could be your house helper, is both of them do not accept that they're being abused. And I'll just go back to the first thing that I said in the very beginning. The biggest reason why victims do not come out and talk and just tell and just put it out there that this happened to us. Like, leave aside, I'm not even saying going to the police and telling. I don't even think I'm comfortable telling my, say, friends and family that, okay, I was abused, etc., etc. So, in that sense, I feel like this is common for every woman out there. You don't want to talk about that abuse of the fear that if I tell them that I posted this picture and it got doxed, it got morphed, it got sold or anything, is that they'll ask me कि तुमने उसको post ही क्यों किया था? Or if I got sexually abused, they're probably going to be like, why were you wearing so and so, and आप बाहर क्यों थे इस time पे, etc. and etc. And I feel like this is a problem for the gender as a whole, irrespective of which economic background they come from. Might be a bit less in some families, but en masse, within all sorts of women that I've met, extremely successful business women, women in armed forces, women here, women there, house helpers, women who might be like begging on roads. One common problem with gender minorities in the country, and I don't think this is just for women, I would say gender minorities in the country and globally, I would want to include them in my answer as well, is that the greatest fear is nobody's going to question, or that is going to be a much later process of like dealing with the perpetrator. The first question and the first few days of the process will be just questioning, why did you put yourself in that position? And somehow it's always going to be a you problem before it becomes a them problem. My biggest solution for this, and I'll go back to it again, is family. In political science, we study family as the building institution, the building block of society, political society, economic society. That if there's a world and there's a country and then the state and a district and like a village and all that, then family is one of the institutions. A political institution, it's a social institution. And every change actually just begins there. I feel like I am the way I am, and I personally feel like I am more open and I'm more empowered only and only because I saw that at my home, my mother allowed this. My mother made sure that there was enough space for me to come and tell her that Mama, this happened to me. And she used to support me. She used to be like, okay, we're going to deal with it. And there were no questions asked to me like, in a bad manner, like, okay, tum wahan kya kar rahi thi, and everything. It was always like, okay, I'm there for you. I've seen my mother not shutting up. If we're walking on the road and if someone catcalls me, my mother would deal with that person immediately, no questions asked, no victim blaming towards me. And that, I believe, is the reason why I became the way I did, because it started for me back home. A lot of people learn this very late through friends in college, but if you just start this very early in life, which is like your parents, how they teach you about how you perceive crime and how you perceive situations like these, game changer. Until unless I feel this won't happen, this is like the complete circle of a policy being successful. If you need the policy to be successful, it has to have the family being a part of it and practicing it every day.